So yeah, excellent. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Future of REDD Plus Financing Architecture. My name is Andres Espejo. I work for the World Bank as the fund manager, program manager of the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility. And well, we are here to discuss about REDD Plus. As many of you might know, REDD Plus stands for reducing emissions from deforestation, forest degradation, sustainable management of forest, enhancement of carbon stocks, and conservation of carbon stocks. And it's a mitigation mechanism that was created under the UNFCCC in 2013 under the Warsaw Framework, and that it has been recognized under the Paris Agreements under Article 5. And why is it important? Well, it's important not only because of the news that we keep hearing about REDD Plus projects and that this is part of the problem regarding carbon markets, but also because it's part of the solution, right? We have to be mindful that emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, they represent 11% of global total emissions. That's more than the transport sector lumped together. And also is, if we want to achieve the target of 2 degrees at least, 2 degrees by the end of the century, without forest and without REDD Plus, we are not able to make it. So whether we like it or not, we really need forest. So yeah, REDD Plus, it means many things for many people, right? So it means many things for many people, and I mentioned that it was created in the Warsaw Framework, but before in the voluntary carbon market is where we saw all the innovation, right? Where basically project developers, different parties try to implement this at a much lower scale, so at a project level. Although at the Warsaw Framework, basically this REDD Plus was intended to be national and subnational as interim period. And then, well, as basically this moved forward in voluntary carbon markets at a project scale, the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, UN REDD, and others were supporting basically the development of these national frameworks and moving basically towards jurisdictional scale, right? And then, well, we are seeing lately that basically we are moving towards jurisdictional scale, right? So we have a new standard at jurisdictional scale, like our trees, demand pooling mechanism that has been created with the Leaf Coalition. We have also seen basically now, for example, Vera, that is now coming with a new methodology that brings it basically requires projects to use a kind of jurisdictional accounting, right? So everything is moving to that side, and the expectation is that jurisdictional scale REDD Plus basically can enable the upscale of mitigation in the forestry sector, but also can solve some of the issues that have been pointed out in different events regarding market integrity. So what do we need in order to basically upscale REDD Plus and basically enable the delivery jurisdictional REDD Plus? So thankfully we have this great panelists at my left. So let me begin on my left with Ms. Rosalind Ajay. So she's Ghana's REDD Plus coordinator and director of climate change at the Forestry Commission of Ghana. Then next, another REDD Plus country representative, Nabaraj Pudaisani. So he's the Joint Secretary and Chief of the REDD Implementation Center under the Ministry of Forest and Environment in Nepal. Just to complement the voices and the views from REDD Plus countries, we also have indigenous people. So we have Mr. Pablo Mis. So he's an indigenous, a leader in Belize, and he's member of the board of the United Nations Voluntary Fund for Indigenous Peoples, and also he's a lead technical advisor for Enable, so enabling access to benefits by lowering emissions. So it's a sister trust fund of the bank. And last but not least, we also, we can hear, views from carbon markets, in this case represented by Christina Magerkurth, the managing director for architecture for REDD Plus transaction, known as ART, and who has wealth of experience in carbon markets, etc. Excellent. So let me begin with the first round of questions. So as I was mentioning, REDD Plus, it has taken a long time to get to this in implementing jurisdictional scale REDD Plus. And fortunately, we are now getting to proof of concept, right? So we are saying already, like, under the FCPF, we have already, 7 countries that have received payments, that have issued emission reductions. They are currently sharing benefits, but we also have seen, like with Ghana and Costa Rica, the first emission reduction purchase agreements signed under their R3 program, right? So this is, moving forward quite significantly, right? We also have seen that communities, especially indigenous peoples, they are asking about having direct access to benefits, right? So so the question to you all is, what are like the key elements to enable jurisdictional or REDD+ to be upscaled? And I would like to ask each of the panelists one thing that should be maintained or should be kept and perhaps enhanced, and one thing that should be changed that probably hasn't been done that good and should be improved in order to let REDD+ to be upscaled. So let's begin with Rosalind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andres, and a very good afternoon to everybody in the room. Thank you for having Ghana and for having myself, and to be with such great panelists. To go back to the sort of theme for the panel that we are having, the future of the REDD+ financing architecture, and to answer your question, the question I am asking is, what is the current state of that financing architecture and what is guiding REDD+ implementation now? I want to start from the Warsaw Framework and the kind of elements it has in there. So the Warsaw Framework talks about safeguards, MRV, strategies, also talks about forest monitoring systems. I think that in implementing REDD+ in Ghana, one of the key things we have found that is needed that has not been really given a global focus is the level of governance arrangements that we need to put in place within these programs. Now, governance is important, not just for the fact that we want to bring every stakeholder together, but I think that there's a unique stakeholder group, private sector, that we cannot talk about the future of the financing architecture without mentioning private sector. And for private sector, it's key for them to understand how they fit into the overall jurisdictional level governance and how their views will be heard. Most times we're just talking about private sector in terms of bringing on board the finance, but private sector is not just about providing the needed finance. We also need to understand what works for private sector, what are their interests, and what kind of returns they want to have on their investments as they engage in these programs. So I think that governance is one of the things that we need to upskill, if possible, add to the different Warsaw Framework elements, because we have learned the hard way. We went through a 10-year readiness without necessarily focusing on governance at the jurisdictional level. We spoke a lot about institutional arrangement, but these two are different, talking about institutional arrangements at the national level and then governance really at the subnational or landscape level where things are happening. So that would be governance. Now, what needs to be changed? A number of things. I think funding arrangements need to be changed. We also need to work on the benefit sharing and distribution. As we have it now, we have a lot of funds coming into the central government and then government then working through the benefit sharing arrangements. I want to see a stage where we get to if indigenous and local communities, indigenous people and local communities are receiving a particular percentage, funds should be able to flow directly to them from whoever the buyer is, not getting into government before getting into the different layers. But the one thing I really want to talk about in terms of what needs to change is about perception. It might not be tangible enough, but I think that we need to work on perceptions. REDD+ has suffered a lot on the market, and it's not really working well for us if we are to get into that future of financing that is sustainable, that's guaranteed, that's committed. We need to work on our perceptions. I have seen a lot of products come up with defects right from manufacturing stage. Cars sometimes come out with defects, clothing, everything really. There can be recalls. But when we have a REDD+ program or projects coming up with some sort of defect or issues, it's blown out of proportion. Everybody keeps talking about it. And one particular project then begins to affect every other country and what we are doing. And that's too negative for where we want to get to. We shouldn't see forestry or REDD+ as some sort of different project that is, untouchable or it's also it's also really out there, and we can have faults within that system, and we can only learn as we continuously work on this and then learn on those faults. So we need to change our perceptions, or else we are not going to help Red Plus get to where it has to get to, even with all the different proofs of concepts that different countries now are demonstrating that Red Plus is possible, and Red Plus really can help us get to the 1.5 degrees Celsius world that we are looking for. Thank you.
Great. No, thank you so much for those views. So basically, governance, international, but also local level, something to keep, and then something to change that probably we will hear from our colleagues. Benefit sharing plan, and also like all this perception, how we can improve like the image. Thank you so much. So Nabaraj, what are your views?
Thank you for this great opportunity to discuss about the upskilling the REDD Plus program, especially from the experience of Nepal. And in my perception, for the Nepal-like country, we are facing so many issues on the MRV process. It's a long and complicated process. We got a good experience from the FCPF. So I think it's a time to investing the more technology development and the transfer it in a digital MRV. This is the one thing we can upscaling the REDD Plus mechanism in the good movement. And another thing is that the rating of the quality carbon credit from the forest. We are not protecting only the forest. We are involving and ensuring the right of the indigenous people and the community. And we are not protecting our forestry resources. We are protecting the tiger, rhino, and elephant, so many biodiversity conservation. Who will rating the commercial carbon credit and the nature that protect the right of the people, that protect the right of the indigenous people? Who will count? Who will grade the carbon credit? This is the another thing we have to rethink, that the REDD Plus mechanism should upscaling in that should count the quality of the carbon in terms of indigenous people, community, and the biodiversity conservation. Especially the endangered species are protecting in our forest. The quality with of the plantation forest and the commercial forest is the different thing, but our nature is not giving only the commercial carbon credit, but also we are protecting so many things. That's why this is the another thing we have to rethink about the restructuring of the architecturing of the REDD Plus mechanism. Another most important thing is that not we are talking about the shrub, herb, and tree, that the standing and the living biomass. We have to concentration on the integrated land use management, especially focusing on the integrated land use planning that would enhance the importance of the REDD Plus mechanism. It's our experience, what we think. We are working with our community, with our farmer, with our development partner. This is a good thing if we integrate the land use thing. These 3 points I focus to upskilling the REDD Plus mechanism. And there is, I can suggest only one thing, that that is the maintaining major thing, is that ensure the participation of indigenous people and the community. Without their engagement in the future planning, in the current practice, we cannot manage our forest, we cannot implement the 5 major components of the REDD Plus mechanism. So from local to the global level, how to participate, how can we engage the indigenous people and the community in the multi-level collaboration approach. That's the strategy we should maintain and keep it on. Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you for those views. I already see some consistency. So you were discussing about MRV, digital MRV, right? That it's probably taking very long, and Rosalie mentioned about like the payments, no, that they should be processed directly, and perhaps over there is where digital solutions they could have some solution, right? And exactly, you have also mentioned, as Rosalie mentioned, like this thing of perception, but it's also about like explaining all these co-benefits that are being generated. That it's not only about carbon, right? And this is much more, right? So no, thank you. So Pablo, what are your views on this? So what would you keep, maintain, or perhaps enhance, and what would you improve?
Thank you very much. My name is Pablo Mis. I am Maya Ekchi from Southern Belize, and I'd like to draw from our experience on this topic in Belize, but also leaning on the input from the global meeting, global dialogue we had in Costa Rica with over 60 indigenous leaders from all over the world, talking directly about how can we ensure that climate financing reaches communities a bit better. Building off what Rosalind mentioned, the perception, and I think it is a key stumbling block in this effort. Clearly, for indigenous peoples, guardianship of forests is something that we do, and there is a recognition that jurisdictional REDD programs can deliver benefits, not only to people, but to nature, and is a key and a low-hanging fruit in our response to the climate crisis that we have. However, in order for us to be able to get there, there is this call and this demand for high-integrity carbon programs. And integral to that is the architecture that we're talking about, the structures that accompanies the program at the national level, where there's a need to have a framework that allows for harnessing the credible participation of all key climate players. And included in this are indigenous peoples and local communities. Now, being able to have them integral in the architecture of the national program allows then for that cross-pollination of knowledge, of experiences, of best practices, of priorities, but also identifying the gaps that exist amongst the key partners. Private investors, for instance, private sector, might have more resources, in fact has more resources than indigenous peoples. And so it allows us to see where the investment needs to be made in order for us to sustain a long-term program in addressing climate. Now, I think that there is a missed opportunity from the FCPF early interventions in FCPF countries where the program itself allowed for creating a space for dialogue and engagement with many key players at the national level. However, as the program went along to develop country programs, we saw kind of a decrease in that active engagement, particularly for indigenous peoples. The call really is for us to be able to go back to ensuring that there is direct participation. And that participation needs to be beyond seeing them as mere beneficiaries in the REDD Plus program. If we're talking about direct financing to communities, to indigenous peoples, you're not going to achieve that if you stop short of just seeing them as beneficiaries to the program. We need to be able to see them and give them their right place as guardians of those forests, as right holders, as collaborators, as partners in this long fight against against climate change. Now, my last point here is then, we will then see that there is a need to invest in the local land institutions that would allow indigenous peoples to have a credible participation in this long-term effort to address climate crisis. Now, if we're able to achieve that and put that in place, we are on the road to actually restoring that integrity that we're looking for in the carbon landscape.
Yeah, thank you, Pablo. Christy, what are your views?
Sure. So I guess first, thank you for inviting me on this panel. The danger with being the fourth speaker on a question like this with amazing panelists is I now must pivot some of my answers so I don't just say, yep, I agree. So I think taking a slightly different lens, I would say the thing that we must maintain in light of these perception issues and some of the challenges is markets. We need markets. Markets really can put a value on carbon and incentivize change in a way that philanthropy just isn't going to do. Especially the scale of finance that we need to protect and restore forests around the globe. You're just not going to scale up philanthropy to that level, or we wouldn't be where we are today if that was going to work. So I really do think we need markets. I think I've heard it in several sessions, and I believe that we're starting to see a convergence of compliance and voluntary markets. The end use might be different, but I don't think you're seeing as many differences in quality or integrity, the expectations on what is generating those results is becoming the same. I think as those two converge, we're going to have a unique opportunity to really drive both demand and the price, because I think one thing that hasn't come up is, the price has to be sufficient to, counter the other drivers of deforestation. So I think we're at a moment where it's really exciting, and we're on the precipice of some of this coming to fruition. With that, though, there's always the question of how do you ensure equitable distribution of both the efforts and the financial returns. And I think we've heard from a lot of panelists about how do we involve Indigenous peoples and local communities and as partners, not just as beneficiaries. But I would say I'll go a step further from a standards lens, and how do we ensure that all stakeholders are meaningfully engaged in the market design, right? So not just the programs at the national level, but how do we ensure that both forest country governments and Indigenous peoples and local communities are actually part of the market setup and framing. I think if we don't include those stakeholders, we run the real risk of, well, many things, but two major things. One being that we end up with an academic exercise that sounds great on paper, but isn't achievable in any country on earth, and that really does us no good either. Or two, that we're incentivizing outcomes that don't actually help people and help the forest, right? So, ultimately we want to ensure that whatever requirements trees has, that our end result is an outcome that is actually helpful. And if you don't have forest governments and Indigenous peoples and local communities right at the beginning helping you write the standards and think through these, I think you're going to not end up in a place that you want to be. So we're starting to see more of that happening, which I think is amazing. I know for art it's a priority for us, but I think we need more of that as an entire marketplace to really have the change that we want.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very, very interesting views, and I think that's precisely where, as also Pablo said, with the FCPF Readiness Fund and also its governance, where basically you have donors at the same level as countries, with the Indigenous peoples and observers, and basically it was a forum where basically you could have all these discussions related to the implementation of REDD+. That was precisely that something that we no longer have, right, and could really support basically what some of the recommendations that are being made, right? So perhaps that could be something to consider. Perhaps it's not related to REDD+ financing architecture. Perhaps it's related to the arrangements for implementation of REDD+ as in general, and that's something where the bank could play a role in supporting. So let me move then to the next round of questions, and let's try to be efficient, and so that we have some time to give allow some questions from the floor. So let me begin with Rosalind. So many of you might know that Ghana is really like an example of a jurisdictional REDD+. You have received 2 payments from the FCPF. You have signed an emission reduction purchase agreement with the LEAF Coalition. You have recently also engaged with a company for a long-term supply of high integrity emission reduction credits. Currently, your program doesn't cover the entirety of the country. So what comes next, right? What do you see like the opportunities for basically expand geographically, sectorally, and what do you see like the main barriers in order to enable this expansion?
Thank you very much, Andres. So as you rightly mentioned, Ghana has been at the forefront of implementing REDD+ at a jurisdictional scale. Now, for us going forward, we are looking at both a horizontal sort of expansion and then also a vertical expansion. So for the horizontal, we are looking at being able to get to a lot of our local communities and our farmers and people within the landscape. Now, we started with the FCPF. That was about 7 regions of Ghana. We have 16 in total. And now with trees, we have expanded to 10 of these regions. Now, even though we have expanded in terms of region or jurisdiction, we still have a lot of pockets of farmers, communities that have not been fully captured. So for the horizontal expansion, we want to make sure that we activate a very good inclusivity plan. So if there's any farmer, if there's any local community member who has contributed to achieving emission reductions, we want them to benefit from the carbon payments. That's very paramount to us, because if we do not ensure that we have everybody on board, then we are going to just create a system that has so many gaps, and eventually it will just crumble because just a few people are experiencing the benefits of sustainable forest management and REDD+. And then we want to get into the vertical. The vertical is where we are looking at markets. I mean, Chrissy mentioned markets. So we are looking at signing more deals. We moved from the World Bank. Now we have LEAF. We also have some oil companies that have a net zero strategy in place, but have to work on offsetting their hard-to-abate emissions as they get to net zero. We are partnering with some of them to deliver forest solutions or forest credits for them to work on these hard-to-abate emissions. So that's the vertical. Now, the barriers that we see, one is price. I was in the one session at the Climate Action Arena before coming here, and one of the panelists said that we need to get to a place where we set a global price for carbon. That would be amazing if we can do that, at least as a threshold. Now, at the moment, the prices that we have for forest carbon credits are not exciting. When I hear people talk about price, sometimes I wonder what kind of mathematics they are doing. Now, we are talking about economic development in developing countries. Just this year, I had a look at, I was telling you before we started the session, I had a look at the timber revenue generated for just 6 months. I think it was about 100 million euros for exports. Now, the biggest carbon or emission reductions purchase agreement that Ghana has signed is for 10 years for $90 million US. You can't compare the two. It doesn't make any political sense. It doesn't make any technical arguments right. Because we need to face the reality. These are countries that are still grappling with development. And we are saying, leave these trees standing. But what is the commensurate price we are paying? If you're paying $5, $10, $15, and it's even going to come in at the end of 10 years, it doesn't make sense even to our political dispensation. We are talking about 4-year, 2 terms. I mean, every sort of presidency and what they are looking out for. So if we don't look at price or work on price and pay what it actually takes for us to keep these trees standing, we might be talking a lot in these places, forums, wherever, but we won't get there. The other aspect is that illegality pays, take it or not. The illegalities within our forested areas, they pay. Illegal logging pays, illegal mining pays, whichever way you look at it. We can talk about enforcement all we want to talk about, but at the end of the day, when you get into these spaces, those who are engaged in the illegality are benefiting for a livelihood. Now, at the moment, we have a project that is paying hard labor about, in our local currency, about 50 cedis to work per man days. The illegal activities are paying 3 times that. So even when you want to get people in the communities to work on genuine projects, the amount of monies we are paying for them cannot be compared to what the illegal people are paying. And these are some of the realities we are facing. You can't go in today to evict, but at a point in time, the eviction also comes with a lot of resources needed to keep on doing these operations. So we need to work on price. The other thing I want to talk about is we need to work on markets. Now, the markets that are evolving need some level of standardization. I know like ICVCM is working, VCMI is working, but we need some kind of standardization because every particular market sort of comes up with its own rules and regulations for the same jurisdiction. So for one country, we are responding to A here, we are responding to B there, we are responding to C there. Our local communities just get confused by all these different things. Even the government actors, we have gotten confused a number of times. And it's just a few people working on different things. The last thing I want to talk about is continuous capacity building. I've heard in many circles that we've built so much capacity over time for REDD+, it should stop because we are in the results-based payment phase. Every single stage of REDD+ has its own capacity that we need to build. Readiness had its unique capacities. Implementation or piloting had. Now results-based payment phase has even more capacity building needed to be done than even readiness. If we don't get into the nuances of capacity building or technical assistance, we might just make these blanket statements that will not help us get to where we want to get to. For example, and I'm bringing this to an end, we talk about local communities and indigenous people receiving their own emission reduction payments. I am for that, and I want that to happen one day. Question is, when we started implementing, now we've realized that most of our local community actors need laptops because these are huge monies. This year alone, you talked about the second payment that we have received. $11 million is going directly to local communities. Question is, have they been taken through auditing protocols? Have they been taken through procurement protocols, office management? We are asking them to keep files. Are they keeping them in their homes? Where are they keeping them? They don't have any office spaces to do all these. This is another bucket of capacity building that we need to focus on. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much for your intervention. So, yeah, I mean, you have pointed out to many challenges, right? To basically upscaling, addressing the emissions, from deforestation and forest degradation. And well, now my question to Navaraj is really like forward-looking, right? So countries like Nepal that have been successful in reducing deforestation, thanks in part to community based forestry. There will be a moment where basically there won't be any emission reductions, right? Because basically you will achieve net zero emissions. I mean, Nepal, I think that is on track to achieve this by 2030, in line with the commitments, in Glasgow. So the question to you is, what is next? I mean, how are you able to basically continue providing incentives, for forest protection and sustainable forest management?
Okay, thank you for the perfect question for this scenario that we will achieve the global climate goal from the country level to the global level. I think I see 2 or 3 things. One is the economic incentives that covers the payment of environment services. If Nepal-like countries institutionalize the concept of payment of environment services, focusing on the hydropower. Nepal has a potential capacity of producing the 42,000 megawatt hydropower potential capacity. That depends on the water side, and water side covers the 3 elements: people, land, and the forest. So if we connect our community to the hydropower watershed conservation, then we can incentivize through the PES mechanism. This is one major thing. And the other important thing is that the drinking water projects, because the water is the major source, and Nepal is the good spring water country. So we can conserve our water, we can purified water we can supply to the world. This is the another thing that our community forestry is already initiated in some small projects. We can engage them in this payment of environment services. This is one thing. And another thing is that after we getting some good money from the FCP of maybe the leaf collision, we are implementing 2 major ER program. We are thinking that we will establish a reward fund for maintaining the forest cover. If we establish the reward fund, that will incentivize regularly who are maintaining the forest cover. This is our plan, and we can incentivize our people and the community. And another thing is the market-based opportunity. It means the people are already applying the principle of sustainable development in the forestry, sustainable forest management. It means at the end of the net zero emission target, when we achieved, at that time, we will have a 5.2 million sustainably forest management. It means we can manage the certified timber or NTFEs can offer to the forest-dependent community. This is another opportunity we can do. And the last one thing is that the nature-based tourism. We can engage our private sector. Maybe in the nature-based tourism, Nepal is the only one country. We triple our tiger population. Now, in the beginning time, we have just only 100 rhinos. Now we have 752. We can sell the environment product to the market. Oh, welcome! You can see our landscape. You can enjoy with our biodiversity forestry landscape. We can sell our recreational thing that our community and indigenous people are protecting. So if we attract the private sector to manage the nature-based tourism with the active involvement of community, this is major one thing we can incentivize our people. And the last thing is that the biodiversity conservation grants. It's a claim. We are not only protecting our forest, we are not only reducing the emission, we are protecting the biodiversity. This is one of the triple planetary crisis. So biodiversity degradation is a major one. So we will establish a biodiversity conservation grants through getting so many engagement of the private sector, multiple donor, multiple development partner. We'll get some good grants from the FCPF, Leaf Coalition, and the REDD Plus mechanism, and we will invest for the biodiversity conservation grants to incentivize our community. That's our plan. We'll do. So I think these are the additional incentives we can provide to the community and indigenous people and the local people for the prosperity of the country. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you so much. I mean, I guess that's the way forward, right, to ensure the long-term sustainability. And I think that you have hinted on biodiversity, credits as a way to access to a different type of finance that hopefully, in the next decade, it will be, readily available for those countries that basically have reached basically that net zero deforestation.
Sorry, I want to add one thing. Now we are producing the good woman leader in the world. Now we have the 62,000 women leaders. They are elected in the local level. They will make a policy how to conserve forest after achieving the goal zero target. Our 62,000 women leaders will make a good policy in local level, and in the central level, in the global level, they will advocate what is the future of the additional incentive that will be created by the forest resources. I think they will do. We have a capacity, and they will do, and we will support from the government side.
Yeah, thank you, Navaraj. So, Pablo, so, I mean, we already know, how important are indigenous peoples. Over 80% of remaining terrestrial biodiversity is basically, protected thanks to indigenous peoples, right? And what we see, from jurisdictional REDD Plus is that, these are usually like a centralized programs, right, that are basically led by national or subnational governments, and then the participation of indigenous peoples is through I mean, there are different ways of participating, but then they have access to benefits, right? So what improvements would you see in benefit sharing arrangements in order to basically, improve social inclusion, but also improve, participation of indigenous peoples or other communities, in the carbonization efforts?
Thank you. And perhaps maybe just to build off my first intervention, keeping in mind of the need to see indigenous communities beyond being just beneficiaries. And actually listening to the two presenters, colleagues, perhaps one of the shortfalls is that when indigenous peoples are considered in the benefit sharing schemes, it's often the promise of financial benefits in return to conserve or the guardianship of forest they're in. But what we're hearing from Nepal and Ghana is perhaps benefit sharing arrangements to be seen as actually a critical stepping stool or a step to larger issues of governance, the larger issues of capacity building. So how do we get there at least? There is a need to ensure that benefit sharing arrangements then are place-based. The reality of Ghana is different than the reality of Belize, for instance, and we heard as well the criticism from the Minister of Finance yesterday that carbon projects in Belize have not been able to work because of the realities of Belize as a developing country. So benefit sharing agreements or arrangements need to be place-based. And the task then that we've seen and we've heard from indigenous people is that when you're thinking of benefit sharing, it needs to be based on principles and values that's already in agreements. For instance, the Cancun safeguards. At the global dialogue in Costa Rica, leaders were talking about the need to go beyond just doing no harm, but actually doing good. So perhaps a need to have a framework for the development of benefit sharing agreements at the national level to help or different countries respond to that place-based need, and for it to be beyond just the promise of financial benefit. So if we're able to do that, then we need to be able to identify who the right indigenous peoples are or the collaborators are that needs to be a part of constructing these benefit sharing arrangements. That will allow as well for the development of arrangements that are responsive, that are relevant, that are appropriate to the indigenous peoples that are in those forests or that are stewarding those forests that is under the program. And of course, there's a critical need, and I agree with Rosalind, that inherently we need to be able to strengthen the institutional arrangements of indigenous peoples as partners in order for them to be able to receive these benefits, but beyond that, look at all the capacity, look at all the governance matter that is needed, and that the distribution of these benefits reaches far, that they're able to properly account and monitor for it. And this is necessary to guarantee, as I mentioned earlier, their long-term participation, because we're talking about 10-year programs if we learn from Ghana. And normally, if we only look at benefit sharing agreements as a promise of financial benefit, once that once the finances dry out, then we lose actually not only the confidence of people, but we go back to the practice of degrading those very resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Pablo. So before we move to Christy, I'm mindful of time, so 9 minutes left. So after Christy intervenes, I will ask questions, from the floor. So be ready and perhaps, raise your hand, and I guess that there will be someone passing a microphone, I guess. I don't know. Yes?
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, Christy, so coming to you, I mean, we have been hearing in the different sessions the importance of, high environmental and social integrity. And we have been saying, across the years, different initiatives related to REDD+, either in Article 6 or voluntary carbon markets, basically claiming a high quality, high integrity, etc. Right? And my personal perception is that there's like a lot of confusion, right? So people, they don't know, what is the difference between jurisdictional REDD+, what is the I4C framework, etc., right? So what do you think we could do, better in order to basically, explain these differences and bring clarity to markets, right? Regarding, what is REDD+, what is the difference between these different initiatives, and basically help them to navigate this complexity.
Sure. So it's a great question. Not only are there a lot of different REDD+ initiatives, but then if you start looking at everything that's tangentially related, conservation credits or conservation initiatives or biodiversity credits or biodiversity grants, there is a lot of different initiatives in this landscape. So it can be confusing not only for governments or communities or supply side, but also for demand side, right? If I'm an organization, how do I know where to put my money? And I have fears of being the next Guardian article or, all those types of things. So it can be confusing. I think right now there's already a few different places where both supply and demand can get information. Simplest would be, well, most straightforward is just to call the programs and ask, about them, ask questions about, how do you do verification? Are your safeguards actually verified? How does all this work? That takes a lot of capacity, though, for any organization or government, right? Just the bandwidth, the time alone to call different programs and really understand, not to mention then having the capacity to fill out your little table with the responses and figure out what that actually means and what the implications are. So you could do it that way, but I think most organizations are choosing not to unless they have a full team, which most organizations don't. Another way is to look for, external approvals. So looking for what programs have been approved under ICAO for use under CORSIA, for example. ICAO is a great example because they are a special agency of the UN, so the reviews are done by, multinational groups and are really detailed. Having gone through it a couple of times now, I will promise you that they spend a lot of time and ask a lot of questions, but then they approve programs and methodologies. You've probably heard a lot about ICVCM over the last couple of days. If you hadn't heard about it before, they're another independent organization that's looking at the governance of programs as well as then the specific methodologies. So again, that might be a way of looking at vetting some of these programs or what you might want to do. There's also other options. Obviously there's NGOs or other credible scientific organizations. Some of them have collaborated and produced things like the Tropical Forest Credit Integrity Guide, TFCI. That was a collaboration between all the usual, so TNC, WRI, CI, WWF, WCS, the whole alphabet soup as I'm reading those off. But they also, several years ago included COICA, an indigenous umbrella organization from South America because they wanted the indigenous perspective. And together, all of these organizations spent a very long time looking at all the different REDD Plus methodologies, and they've put together a guide for how to procure high-integrity REDD Plus credits. So, the benefit of something like that guide is it's the collective wisdom of all of these groups in one place. So, it's not a 2-page document, but at least then you don't have to go to everybody's website or, just Google REDD and find 100,000 articles. So I think initiatives like that are really helpful. Moving forward, I think we do tend to get into market speak, right? So we start throwing around terms that not everybody necessarily understands, or worse, might mean something different from program to program, and I think that just gets super confusing. So I think we can move towards some standardization, as you mentioned, Rosalind, but I think we also don't want to lose the point of having some of these different programs. They are serving different purposes, or looking for assigning the value to different things. So I think we need to standardize where it's appropriate, but also maintain the uniqueness so that there are options for countries, options for communities. What we don't want is to get to the point where there's a single standard, take it or leave it, and that's all you've got. So I do think the different streams will be important, but I think we can do a lot to improve that clarity.
Great. Thank you, Christy. So let's open the floor to any question that audience might have. I think there was a hand there. And then we have here a second question, and I think that's let's go for 2 questions. And I think that I'm not sure if we will have time for the second question, but
thank you for your discussion. It's really interesting. So I guess I'm kind of echoing Pablo's concerns as well. Like, obviously we've seen a lot of bad press sometimes around REDD projects, be it justified or not sometimes. But I guess kind of the concern I would have is in terms of if we're scaling everything to a jurisdictional scale, obviously in terms of carbon accounting, this is kind of a better way of doing things. But is it not in terms of governance exactly? How do you involve IPLCs, and also especially in countries where sometimes like land rights for IPLCs are not really recognized? Would that not become a bigger issue? And how is, for example, the R-Trees initiative kind of maybe having criteria or making sure that those countries that haven't recognized maybe land rights for IPLCs are developing REDD projects in a proper manner, I guess, in that way? Thank you.
Sure. So I know that we only have a few minutes. I'm happy to spend hours on this discussion with you. So I would say yes, obviously jurisdictional crediting has the need for environmental and social safeguards. So for arts, for trees, we built our safeguards off of the Cancun safeguards. As Pablo mentioned, we felt that was a really good framework. For us, it's also been critical to learn how things are different in every country. The way our safeguards are written are not prescriptive. So we don't say, for example, carbon rates have to be tied to land tenure. They're not in every country. In some countries, it's completely independent of land tenure, so you might have questions around land tenure but have really clear carbon rates, right? So we've had to be sensitive to the fact that there's different frameworks, and how do we ensure? So we fundamentally say you have to respect the rights of the indigenous peoples, not you must give them land rights, because maybe that's just not where the carbon is associated. So we have tried to set up our program to do that. As I mentioned, though, one of the things that we've been trying to do is really include indigenous peoples and local communities in our review processes. So if you give me another month or 2, we are going to launch a public comment for co-benefits certification. So this is a lot of what we heard from indigenous people is, rights are one thing, but there's outcomes we want too. And really we want there to be a metric, and we want to drive change in these areas. So we had our first only indigenous peoples and local community advisory group that helped us draft that. So that'll be coming out pretty soon. That'll be a layer people can put on it. And then we have an indigenous peoples and local community group helping us review our safeguards, because we're currently going through a revision of the standards. So to us, that's super important. I think the other thing I'll highlight is we do have a pathway for direct IP participation. So again, it's coming out in Climate Week, because everybody wants to do big announcements during Climate Week, but during Climate Week, there will be a formal announcement that we have our first indigenous-led jurisdictional program under ART. So there's 3 indigenous organizations in Peru that have signed an agreement with the government of Peru. And the irony is their benefit sharing is actually backwards. So their benefit sharing is what the government gets as a beneficiary of their program. So it's a really amazing moment because they're going to do the MRV, they're going to file all the reports, they're leading it, but the government is their beneficiary. So I think that'll be an amazing proof of concept that you can even have indigenous-led jurisdictional programs. It doesn't have to be only governments. And I think having that flexibility is really important. So anyway, happy to spend hours on our safeguards and stuff, but it is very important to us as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. We have officially run out of time, but let's go for the second question, and we can wrap it up.
Thank you so much. I will try to be concise. So thank you for this scenario. It's really important to keep talking about REDD+, to how to keep together, to work together. And as we saw today, REDD+ brings hope for low-income communities. And that's something that we have to keep into mind, but also cheaper price right now. And today we talk a lot about perspectives, yeah? Perspective of REDD+, of jurisdictional, but I'm concerned about also the projects, the local projects, because today is more about jurisdictional. So what's that perspective for the local private projects, not developed only when I say private, it's okay, companies, but at least I am from Colombia. Some communities are directly building the projects and directly working on the projects, but sometimes feeling that that's not taken into account. Those examples, as we talked today, we have bad examples, but we also have amazing projects worldwide. And if it's not looking good for the jurisdictional, for the REDD+, what is the perspective for the private or the smaller projects? And how could those smaller projects also participate in the global markets? Because now they are limited to the global south, we could say that, but it's not really easy to get into the global European or American markets. So I would like also to know your point of view regarding those concerns that I have right now. Thank you.
Oh.
I don't know if...
I'm happy to, but if you guys come to.
Yeah. Just some few thoughts on that. Thank you very much for talking about the fact that REDD+ is hope for a lot of the landscapes that we represent. For Ghana, it is a huge ray of hope for our local communities. And the point that you made about the fact that there are local communities who are doing some of these projects, and there are good projects, I think we need to work on how we showcase these good projects. I have had the opportunity to have conversations where I've mentioned, let's have roadshows, let's have platforms where we showcase how these good projects are working or good programs are working. Because if we don't turn the narrative around ourselves, we are still going to just keep on hearing these few instances of bad ones that just translates into negating all the good things that we've done. The Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership has a particular conversation on forest carbon credits, and one of the key things that we are working on there is changing the narrative, bringing out these stories, bringing out these showcases, letting people know that REDD+ is hope for a lot of countries, and local communities are doing these things very, very well in many instances, and we need to support that. I don't know if I get to talk again, or this is the wrap-up. So if this if is the wrap-up, I just want to mention just one thing that it just occurred to me. I'm wearing 2 bracelets. I don't know if you can see. This was given to me by my son. At his level, I value this so much from him. It's just made out of rubber. And I'm wearing another one that's metal. What we expect to see, so when we talk about perceptions, the other side is expectation. A number of us have expectations for what REDD+ is, but we don't want to invest into it. If my son gets to the stage where he can do a metallic bracelet, I should be able to invest in that. So at that time, if I've invested, I'm not going to expect this rubber from him. But at this time, what I've invested is the rubber he's giving me. But it tells me that he has the mind, he has the capacity to upgrade, because it's just the same design, it's just different materials. That's the same place we should put REDD+. That's the same place we should put forests. Every time forests are receiving less and less financing, every time we are having negative news out there, we are not helping the conversation. If we have expectations for what forest and REDD+ should be, we should invest in them appropriately. And we are going to see that eventually. If we don't invest, we shouldn't have those high expectations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Very well said. I'm mindful of time. It's almost 5 minutes, and we have to be, fair with the next session. So with these very wise words, let's stop the session here. And of course, we will be available for any questions and further discussions regarding this. So yeah, thank you so much for participating.
Thank you.